Vex Maya stepped off the transport ship, her four eyes scanning the massive space station that stretched before her like a glittering city in the stars. Harmony's Rest was the most neutral place in the galaxy, built where three major trade routes crossed. It was perfect for hosting events where species that normally wanted to destroy each other could come together for something they all loved: food. The alien chef had 6 arms, each ending in delicate manipulators that could taste molecular structures just by touching them. Her blue-scaled skin shimmered under the station's artificial lights as she made her way through the crowded corridors. Beings of every shape and size moved past her, some floating, some walking on tentacles, others gliding on energy fields. But they all knew who she was. Vex Maya had won the Galactic Culinary Championship 15 times in a row. The competition hall was enormous, with cooking stations arranged in perfect circles around a central judging platform. Each station was equipped with the most advanced food preparation technology in the galaxy. Molecular assemblers could create any ingredient at the atomic level. Quantum flavor enhancers could make a single bite trigger memories that never existed. Gravity manipulators could cook food in impossible ways, folding space-time itself to create new textures. The competitors were already arriving, and Vex Maya studied each one with professional interest. The crystalline hegemony had sent their master chef Zilthara, whose transparent body could literally taste with light. The crystals in his chest glowed different colors as he sampled the air, analyzing every molecule for flavor potential. His cooking station looked more like a laboratory than a kitchen, filled with prisms and laser arrays that could cook food with pure energy. Near the center of the hall, the Hive Collective's representative worked with mechanical precision. This species had evolved beyond individual consciousness, sharing one vast mind across billions of bodies. Their chef moved with perfect efficiency, every motion calculated by their collective intelligence. They could predict exactly how much nutrition each judge would need and create food that would optimize their biological functions down to the cellular level. To them, cooking was just another form of engineering. The methane breathers from the outer rim had brought their famous gas-based cuisine, which existed more as controlled explosions than actual food. The silicon shapers were preparing dishes that would grow and evolve in the judges' mouths, changing flavor based on the eater's emotional state. Even the energy beings, who didn't normally eat physical matter, had found a way to compress their thoughts into edible form. Vex Maya felt confident as she surveyed the competition. These were the best chefs from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. Each had mastered technologies that could create food beyond anything the universe had seen before. The prizes they would compete for included rare ingredients worth more than entire planets, and cooking equipment that bent the laws of physics. Then the registration system announced a late entry, and Vex Maya's attention shifted to the entrance. A single figure walked through the doors, looking completely out of place among the technological marvels surrounding him. He was human, a member of that young species from the galaxy's outer edge. They had only discovered faster-than-light travel a few decades ago, and most civilizations still considered them primitives. The human called himself Kim Tae, and he was carrying what looked like ancient cooking tools. Vex Maya could see a worn metal pot, some knives that appeared to be made from actual steel, and wooden utensils that looked like they had been carved by hand. Behind him, a small cart held ingredients that made the station's scanners confused. Everything registered as basic organic matter: vegetables, meat, and various liquids that seemed to have been fermented naturally rather than created in a lab. Other competitors began to notice the human, and whispers spread through the hall, in dozens of different languages. Some laughed with sounds that ranged from musical chimes to grinding static. Others simply stared in disbelief. A few seemed genuinely curious about what this primitive being thought he could accomplish against the galaxy's finest culinary artists. Kim Tae seemed unbothered by the attention. He quietly set up his station, arranging his simple tools with careful precision. Unlike the other competitors who were already running diagnostics on their quantum cooking equipment, the human simply stood still for a moment, closing his eyes, as if listening to something no one else could hear. The competition was about to begin, and Vex Maya found herself strangely curious about the human's presence. In her long career, she had never seen anyone dare to compete with such primitive equipment. It seemed like madness, but something about the human's quiet confidence made her wonder if there was more to this than met the eye. The competition horn sounded across the hall, a deep, resonating note that seemed to vibrate through every surface of the space station. Immediately, the advanced cooking stations came to life with brilliant displays of light and energy. Molecular assemblers hummed as they created perfect ingredients, atom by atom. Quantum flavor synthesizers projected holographic taste matrices into the air. The sound of controlled explosions echoed from the methane breathers station as they began their gas-based preparations. In the middle of all this technological spectacle, Kim Tae quietly placed his simple metal pot on what looked like a primitive heating element. The contrast was so stark that several competitors actually stopped their work to stare. Zilthara, the crystal chef, let out a sound like wind chimes, laughing as his transparent body flickered with amused colors. The Hive Collective's representative paused their mechanical precision to observe this anomaly with their shared consciousness. "Look at the primitive," one of the silicon shapers said, their voice grinding like stones. "He thinks he can cook with actual fire. Does he even understand what competition he's entered?" whispered another competitor, this one from a species that had evolved beyond physical form and existed as pure energy patterns. Vexmaya found herself watching the human more closely than the other contestants, while everyone else was already deep into complex preparations involving impossible physics and advanced chemistry. Tae was doing something that seemed almost ritualistic. He carefully washed his ingredients in plain water, examining each piece with his hands rather than scanning them with sophisticated sensors. The human pulled out what appeared to be fermented cabbage from a simple container. The scanning systems throughout the hall registered it as basic organic matter in various stages of decomposition. To the advanced species present, it looked like the human was preparing to cook with garbage. More laughter rippled through the hall, this time from nearly every station. But Tae seemed completely focused on his task. He heated oil in his basic pot, and the sound of sizzling filled the air around his station. The smell that began to emerge was unlike anything the sophisticated atmospheric processors of the space station had ever encountered. It wasn't the precisely calculated aroma of engineered flavors or the controlled chemical reactions of advanced cuisine. It was something raw and immediate and somehow alive. Vexamaya noticed that her own breathing had changed. She found herself inhaling more deeply, trying to analyze what she was smelling. Her species had evolved sophisticated taste receptors, but this aroma was triggering responses she didn't recognize. It was as if her body was remembering something from long ago, from before her people had perfected their food into pure nutrition. The human added the fermented cabbage to his pot, and the smell intensified. Steam rose from the simple cooking vessel, carrying with it something that made the station's air recycling systems work harder. Other competitors began to notice too. The energy beings who hadn't eaten physical matter in millions of years found themselves drifting closer to the human station. Even the Hive Collective's representatives seemed to slow their mechanical movements, as if their shared consciousness was being distracted by something unexpected. Tae added chunks of meat to his pot, and the sizzling grew louder. Then came cubes of something white and soft that he handled with surprising gentleness. Each ingredient seemed to be chosen not for its molecular perfection or nutritional optimization, but for reasons the watching aliens couldn't understand. The human would smell each piece before adding it, sometimes nodding to himself as if the ingredients were telling him secrets. The other judges began to gather near Vexmaya's observation platform. These were beings from the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, creatures who had spent millennia perfecting the art of food. They had tasted dishes that existed in multiple dimensions, flavors that could rewrite memory, and cuisine that could alter the fundamental forces of physics. But something about the simple stew bubbling in the human's primitive pot was capturing their attention in a way that none of their advanced preparations ever had. "What is he doing?" asked one of the energy-based judges, their form flickering with curiosity. "It appears to be some form of thermal application to organic matter," replied another, though their voice carried uncertainty. The aroma continued to spread through the hall, and something strange began to happen. Species that had evolved beyond hunger started to experience sensations they hadn't felt in centuries. The silicon shapers found themselves producing more saliva than their bodies had manufactured in decades. The crystalline beings began to glow with colors that indicated desire for something they couldn't name. Even the station's artificial intelligence began to malfunction slightly. Its sensors, overwhelmed by trying to analyze something that didn't fit into any of its databases. The smell was just fermented vegetables, meat, and simple seasonings, but somehow it was creating responses that the most advanced technology couldn't explain or replicate. Kim Tae continued cooking, seemingly unaware of the attention he was drawing. But Vex Maya noticed that he would occasionally glance up at the judges with a small smile, as if he knew exactly what was happening and had been expecting it all along. The judging ceremony began with the usual grand display that had become tradition. Over the centuries, each competitor presented their masterpiece on platforms that floated through the air, surrounded by holographic displays explaining the complex science behind their creations. The hall filled with impressed murmurs as dishes that defied physics and challenged reality were unveiled one by one. Zilthara's crystal cuisine came first, a shimmering creation that existed in 7 dimensions simultaneously. As the judges tasted it, their minds expanded to perceive flavors that normal senses couldn't detect. The dish was mathematically perfect, each molecule precisely placed to create the optimal sensory experience. The nutritional content had been calculated to enhance the judges' cognitive abilities while they ate. The Hive Collective's offering was equally impressive, a series of nutrient matrices that adapted to each judge's biology in real time. As soon as the food touched their tongues, it analyzed their cellular needs and adjusted its composition accordingly. Several judges nodded approvingly as they felt their energy levels optimize and their mental clarity sharpen. The energy beings had compressed pure thought into edible form, creating flavors that existed only as concepts. Eating their dish was like tasting the idea of sweetness rather than actual sugar, or experiencing the memory of satisfaction without any physical substance. The technical achievement was staggering, even by galactic standards. Each presentation was met with appropriate appreciation from the panel of judges. These were beings who had spent lifetimes studying the art of advanced cuisine, and they could recognize excellence when they tasted it. The molecular structures were flawless, the nutritional profiles were optimized, and the technological innovation was beyond anything most civilizations could achieve. Then came Kim Tae's turn. The human approached the judging platform carrying his simple metal pot, steam still rising from its contents. Compared to the floating displays and holographic presentations of the other competitors, his approach seemed almost primitive. He ladled the stew into plain ceramic bowls, each portion looking identical to the last. There were no special effects, no technological enhancements, just a reddish broth with visible pieces of vegetables and meat floating in it. Vex Maya accepted her bowl with some skepticism. After experiencing dishes that could alter consciousness and optimize biological functions, this looked disappointingly ordinary. The surface of the broth reflected the station's lights, and she could see small droplets of oil floating alongside pieces of fermented cabbage and cubes of what appeared to be processed bean curd. She brought the bowl to her mouth and took her first taste. The experience was unlike anything in her extensive culinary memory. The first sensation was heat, not the precise thermal control of advanced cooking, but something warmer and deeper. The spicy kick hit immediately, but it wasn't the calculated burn of engineered capsaicin. This heat seemed to spread through her body in waves, awakening nerves she hadn't realized were dormant. Then came the complexity. Her 4-chambered brain, evolved to analyze flavor profiles with scientific precision, struggled to break down what she was experiencing. The fermented cabbage provided a tangy sourness that should have been simple to categorize, but it carried with it something else, layers of time and patience that spoke of slow transformation. The meat wasn't just protein and fat. It tasted of care and attention, as if someone had worried over it while it cooked. But strangest of all was the emotional component. As the broth warmed her throat, Vexmaya found herself experiencing sensations that had no place in a culinary evaluation. The taste triggered memories that weren't her own, images of families gathered around simple tables, of hands stirring, pots with love rather than precision, of recipes passed down not because they were nutritionally optimal, but because they connected generations. Her species had evolved beyond such primitive emotional responses to food millions of years ago. They ate for sustenance and pleasure, analyzing molecular structures and optimizing nutritional intake. But this simple stew was awakening something ancient in her genetic memory, pleasure centers that her people had assumed were evolutionary dead ends. Around the judging table, similar reactions were occurring. The Mentari, a species known for their pure logic and emotional suppression, found their usually cold analytical processes warming with unfamiliar feelings. One of them actually made a sound that could only be described as contentment, something their species hadn't expressed in millennia. The synthetic collective's representative, a being of pure artificial intelligence housed in a mechanical body, requested a second serving, then a third. Their sensors couldn't explain why they kept returning to taste the stew, only that their programming seemed to have developed an unexpected subroutine focused entirely on this simple human dish. Even more surprising was the reaction of the energy beings. These creatures had transcended physical form eons ago, and rarely bothered with matter-based cuisine. But they found themselves lingering near Kim Tae's station, their energy patterns flickering in ways that suggested deep interest, as if the stew contained something their advanced consciousness couldn't replicate or understand. Vexmaya took another spoonful, trying to analyze what made this simple dish so compelling. The ingredients were basic, nothing that couldn't be found on thousands of worlds across the galaxy. The cooking technique was primitive compared to the quantum manipulation and molecular engineering she was used to. Yet somehow, the combination created something that all their advanced technology couldn't achieve. The human stood quietly nearby, watching the judge's reactions with that same small smile he'd worn throughout the competition. It was as if he had expected this response, as if he knew something about food that the rest of the galaxy had forgotten in their rush toward culinary perfection. The competition moved into its second round, and the remaining contestants prepared for the next challenge. Half of the original competitors had been eliminated, including some species that had dominated galactic cuisine for centuries. The shock of seeing advanced civilizations lose to simpler preparations had sent ripples of disbelief throughout the station. Kim Tae set up his cooking area once again, this time pulling out thin slices of meat that he began marinating in what looked like a simple mixture of soy sauce, garlic, and other basic ingredients. The other remaining contestants watched him with a mixture of curiosity and concern. Their earlier dismissal had been replaced by wary respect, though they still couldn't understand how his primitive methods were succeeding. Vexmaya found herself drawn to observe the human more closely. She positioned herself near his station, using her status as head judge to study his techniques without appearing to play favorites. What she saw challenged everything she thought she knew about advanced cooking. Tae worked with his hands more than any chef she had ever observed. While other competitors relied on sensors and scanners to analyze their ingredients, the human touched and smelled everything. He would hold a piece of meat up to his nose, inhaling deeply before nodding with satisfaction. His fingers tested the texture of vegetables, pressing gently to judge their ripeness in ways that seemed almost mystical to the watching aliens. The meat must be cut against the grain, Tae explained quietly as he worked, seemingly talking to himself but loud enough for Vexmaya to hear. My grandmother taught me this. She said the knife should move like water, finding the path that makes the meat tender. This was the first time any competitor had mentioned family during their preparation. The advanced species treated cooking as pure science or art, but never as something connected to relationships or history. Vexmaya's translator struggled with some of the concepts the human was expressing, as if the words didn't have direct equivalents in galactic standard language. As Tae cooked the marinated meat over direct heat, the aroma that filled the air was different from his first dish but equally compelling. The sugars in the marinade caramelized, creating complex layers of sweet and savory that made several judges unconsciously move closer to his station. But it wasn't just the smell that was captivating. It was the way the human moved as he cooked. There was no mechanical precision in his motions, no calculated timing based on molecular analysis. Instead, he seemed to be responding to the food itself, flipping the meat when it sounded right, adjusting the heat when the sizzling changed pitch. It was as if he was conducting a conversation with his ingredients rather than simply processing them. For his next dish, Tay prepared something he called bibimbap, arranging various vegetables and the cooked meat over rice in a pattern that looked almost artistic. But when Vexamaya asked him about the arrangement, his answer surprised her. "Each ingredient has its place," he said, carefully positioning a fried egg on top of the rice. "The colors must balance, yes, but more important is the story they tell, together. The spinach represents the earth where we grow our food. The carrots bring sweetness like the joy of harvest. The meat is the celebration, the reward for hard work." Vexamaya realized that the human wasn't just describing ingredients. He was explaining a philosophy that none of the advanced civilizations had considered. While they had spent millennia perfecting the technical aspects of food, optimizing nutrition, and maximizing efficiency, humans had kept something else alive in their cuisine. "Your people still remember hunger," she said suddenly, the insight striking her like a revelation. Tay paused in his cooking and looked at her with those remarkably expressive eyes that seemed to hold depths of experience. "We remember many things," he said simply. "Hunger, yes, but also the happiness of ending hunger. We remember what it means to share food with people we love, to cook for someone who is sick, to celebrate with special dishes that take all day to prepare." As he spoke, Vexamaya began to understand the true nature of humanity's advantage. Her own species, like most advanced civilizations, had conquered scarcity long ago. They could create any food they wanted instantly, perfectly optimized for nutrition and pleasure. But in gaining that ability, they had lost the emotional connections that came from limitation, from having to work for their food, from the significance that scarcity gave to abundance. "When I was young," Tay continued, mixing the bibimbap ingredients together, "my family was poor. We couldn't afford meat very often, so when we had it, it was special. My mother would spend hours preparing it, making sure every bite was perfect because we didn't know when we would have it again. That care, that attention, it becomes part of the food." The other competitors had begun to listen, their advanced hearing picking up the human's words. The concept he was describing didn't exist in their culinary traditions. Food was either optimal or it wasn't, efficient or wasteful, perfectly prepared or flawed. The idea that limitation and emotional investment could actually improve a dish was completely foreign to them. But as the judges tasted Tay's bibimbap, they experienced the truth of his words firsthand. The dish wasn't technically perfect. The vegetables had slightly different cooking times, the rice wasn't molecularly uniform, the sauce was mixed by hand rather than precisely calibrated. Yet somehow, these imperfections created a harmony that their perfect dishes couldn't match. Vexamaya realized that in their quest for culinary perfection, the galaxy had optimized away the very elements that made food meaningful. They had gained technical mastery but lost the soul of cooking, the connection between food and life, between meals and memory, between eating and belonging. The human continued to advance through each round, not because his techniques were superior, but because his food carried something that couldn't be replicated by even the most advanced technology: the weight of genuine human experience. The final round arrived with an atmosphere unlike any previous competition in galactic history. The Miskar. Usual confident murmurs among spectators had been replaced by hushed anticipation. Word of the humans' unexpected success had spread throughout the station, and beings who had never shown interest in cooking competitions were now crowding into the observation areas. Only 3 contestants remained. Zilthara, the crystal chef, had adapted his techniques throughout the competition, trying to incorporate some emotional element into his light-based cuisine. The Hive Collective's representative had actually begun cooking slightly less efficiently, attempting to understand what the human called soul in food, but it was clear that they were copying techniques without understanding the deeper meaning behind them. Kim Tae approached his final cooking station with the same quiet confidence he had shown from the beginning. For his ultimate dish, he chose to prepare something he called Korean fried chicken, but explained that this wasn't just any version. It was his father's recipe, passed down through generations of their family. As he worked, Tai spoke more openly than he had during the entire competition. The judges and other contestants listened intently as he described how his great-grandfather had developed this recipe during a time of great hardship on Earth, when his family had to make a small amount of chicken feed many people. He couldn't afford expensive ingredients, Tae explained as he mixed his batter by hand. So he learned to make magic with simple things: flour, water, a few spices that grew wild near their home. But the real secret was patience and love. He would stand by the oil, watching each piece cook, knowing that this meal might be the only good thing his family would taste that week. Vex Maya watched the human work, and she began to see something she had missed before. Every movement Tae made was connected to a story, a memory, a relationship with people who had come before him. When he adjusted the temperature of his oil, he was following instincts developed by countless ancestors who had cooked this same dish. When he seasoned the chicken, he was adding not just flavor but the accumulated wisdom of generations. The other finalists presented dishes that were technically magnificent. Zilthara's creation bent light itself into edible form, creating flavors that existed only in the space between dimensions. The Hive Collective's offering was a perfect symphony of nutrition and efficiency, optimized for every possible biological system in the galaxy. But when the judges tasted Tae's fried chicken, something extraordinary happened. The crispy coating shattered between their teeth with a sound that seemed to trigger memories they didn't know they had. The meat inside was tender and juicy, but more than that, it carried the essence of comfort, of celebration, of a family gathered around a table, sharing not just food but their lives. One by one, the judges found themselves unable to speak. These were beings who had spent centuries analyzing flavor profiles and molecular structures, but they couldn't find words for what they were experiencing. The chicken wasn't just food. It was a connection to something primal and essential that their advanced civilizations had forgotten. The announcement of Tai's victory was almost unnecessary. Even before the official declaration, it was clear that something fundamental had shifted in the galaxy's understanding of cuisine. The human had won not just a competition, but had revealed a truth that would change everything. In the weeks that followed, Vex Maya made a decision that shocked the culinary world. She resigned from her position as the galaxy's most celebrated chef and asked Kim Tae to teach her. The idea of an advanced alien learning from a primitive human would have been laughable months earlier, but now it seemed like the most natural thing in the universe. Tae accepted her as his first student, and together they opened a small restaurant on Harmony's Rest. They called it the Humble Table, and from the moment it opened, it was unlike any dining establishment the galaxy had ever seen. There were no molecular assemblers, no quantum flavor enhancers, no perfect temperature controls, just simple cooking equipment and ingredients that came from real farms on real planets. The restaurant became a pilgrimage site. Beings traveled from across the galaxy to experience what they were calling authentic cuisine, food that carried the weight of culture and history, rather than just optimal nutrition. The energy beings, who hadn't eaten physical matter in eons, began requesting specially prepared dishes that allowed them to experience taste through controlled energy fields. The silicon shapers started growing taste buds specifically to appreciate human-style cooking. But the real revolution began when Tai started teaching. His culinary school attracted students from every major civilization, all eager to learn the secret of emotional cooking. However, Tae's lessons were unlike any formal training the galaxy had known. You cannot learn to cook with heart by following formulas, he would tell his alien students as they struggled to understand concepts like cooking with love and tasting for balance. You must first remember what it means to be hungry, to need something more than just nutrition. His teaching methods seemed almost therapeutic. He would have advanced beings sit quietly with simple ingredients, asking them to remember their earliest experiences with food. He taught them that the slight variations they had been trained to eliminate as imperfections were actually what made food interesting and alive. The crystalline students learned to appreciate the way flavor changed when ingredients were handled with care rather than mechanical precision. The Hive Collective members began cooking as individuals for the first time in their species' history, discovering that personal expression could create flavors their shared consciousness could never achieve. Within a year, human cuisine had become the new standard throughout the galaxy. Not because it was technically superior, but because it offered something that all the advanced technology couldn't provide: the ability to nourish both body and spirit, to connect beings not just to nutrition, but to the deeper meanings of community, tradition, and love. Restaurants across the galaxy began serving imperfect food, and for the first time in millennia, beings remembered what it meant to truly enjoy a meal, rather than simply optimize their nutritional intake.